Hi, everybody, and welcome to COVID Chats. My guest for this episode is Eitan Scher. Eitan is a friend of mine I met at Rutgers University, and since graduation has been working at the Columbia Medical Center at New York-Presbyterian Hospital. It was great talking to him about his own personal journey with trying to stay safe from the virus, as well as also getting the inside scoop on what it was like among hospital staff as the virus began to come over to the States. Without further ado, here is episode 5 of COVID Chats. All right, Eitan, great to have you with us for episode 5.
Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Ruben.
Of course, my pleasure. I'll jump right into the first question, which is that, you've spoken to me privately about your harried immune system, and I'm wondering, a good choice of word, I see.
Oh
What's it
yeah.
like? What's it like to be young and part of the demographic that's being blamed for not listening and spreading the virus, while also being someone who, because of their genetics, is at risk themselves?
Yeah, it's a very interesting dilemma because I mean, I'll push back a little bit because like I think on the one hand, yes, we are a bit as in, the millennial Gen Z demographic is definitely responsible. Um, but I also do think there is some level of culpability for the wider American public that is kind of like getting a little bit overblown by like the whole, oh, spring breakers in Miami, where, and obviously that's not the right thing to be doing in terms of a pandemic, in terms of controlling spread and flattening the curve. Um, but to get back to the actual question, um, it's difficult because on the one hand, I do have, let's say, this, kind of like even in my head now, like, oh, I am young overall, still pretty healthy.
Right.
There's that kind of like, rational side that'll kick in and say, well, all right, so worst case scenario, even when you're getting paranoid about whatever, random allergy cough that you may have,
Right.
you're probably fine, even if it is whatever it is. Um, but on the other hand, I am diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. It's called ITP.
Mm.
Um, and to keep it simple, it basically means that my platelets don't produce enough. My blood doesn't produce enough platelets to, adequately stop bleeding.
Mm.
Um, and practically, it doesn't really like affect me that much. But recently, I've also been starting to be evaluated for having low antibodies in my blood,
Mm.
which definitely does have some more relevance in this
Sure.
whole, crisis.
Definitely.
Um, so practically, I think for me, and it kind of, I'm sure I'll get into some of the other talking points we have later. It meant that I was a lot more, I think, alert to the whole nature of the crisis, a lot more than especially a lot of my peers who are, outside of, let's say, this immunocompromised world. I was being extremely prudent in terms of washing my hands, um, you know, social distancing before that term was really like being in wide use.
Right.
Um, I'm sure you can remember there were times where I just like didn't go out to do things a little bit earlier in the month.
Right.
And I would still maybe hang out one on one with somebody, but there is that kind of like spectrum that I think I needed to be a little bit more sensitive to.
Hmm.
Um, and overall, I'd say it's like it's really important to, be mindful of the fact that, even if you're young, there's a good chance whether it's like, it and it's diagnosed or it's something that's undiagnosed because, unfortunately a lot of Americans, do go on living without, fully understanding their health history.
Sure.
Um, that you never know what your reaction to something could be, and it's in this scenario specifically it really is better safe than sorry.
Totally.
um and yeah, it's important to keep that in mind.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I mean, young people, they think they're invincible, right? They think nothing can hurt them. The world is their
Yeah,
oyster. But yeah, no, you definitely still got to wash your
yeah,
hands. You
the
got
underdeveloped prefrontal cortex,
right. Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. I recognize, you lived in the city. You still live in the city. Obviously, you're back home now, but you lived in the
Yeah,
city 2 blocks away from me. And there were times
Yeah.
earlier in the month, maybe I hit you up to hang out and you were a little cautious or something. And it was interesting because that was like the week or two before
Mhm.
it really got quote unquote serious in the city. So I'm wondering, did you have to convince? I mean, I was always cool when you said didn't want to hang out. I was like, all right, no problem. But
Yeah, you're an alright guy. You're understanding.
did you get pushback from other people? Were other people like they're like, you're making too much of a big deal about it, or like how was it? How are other people's responses to that?
Yeah, that is something that, and we've talked about this a little bit, that has been a real struggle, and also, since now it still is a struggle, I think, with the wider community,
Mm,
but now is also like almost interesting to me. Um, is that it kind of like different people got it at different times, and
right.
I think that to some extent it had to do with like how intimate your relationship with this virus is at this point.
Right.
So obviously the first person who really like sounded the alarms was this one physician in China, and it extended eventually to that, I'm sure the medical community there, and then eventually to the community of Wuhan overall. And I remember, like, so currently I work at a hospital, I work in research, but, I'm really more interested in like psychology and brain science and stuff. But previously I was really interested in public health, and like hearing about this, um, I kind of like, that was like when my first, alarm bells were set.
Mm,
Just like knowing the things about like public health infrastructure in the US and the world, like, this had, and just seeing the kind of like the nature of how this like infection was spreading,
mm,
it's like, okay, well, red flag number one. But it
right.
doesn't, even though like you don't have, even though maybe your alarm bells are a little bit set, it doesn't necessarily change your behavior right away.
Sure.
um, but the closer it got, like the more I think it started to definitely affect me personally. I think once we had confirmed cases in New York is when it went from something that, let's say, I was personally interested in, into this is something that is real to me and
Right.
will become real to many New Yorkers and unfortunately many Americans.
Hmm.
And communicating that, um, was a big priority of mine, and it's, I think, still is just a large priority of the public health community overall. And I can't say I got much like pushback. I
Hmm.
mean, I had a lot of people who were skeptical as to like what the nature of this, virus would be.
Right.
I remember telling a friend of mine, not Ruben, that like this is gonna shut everything down
Mm,
because there's gonna be no other choice. And he said, no, we can't do that because it's gonna cause a recession. And I'm like, well, I don't think you understand,
right.
sir. Like it will shut everything down. It's just a
Right.
matter of when.
Yeah.
Um,
The money comes second to the virus.
yeah, and well, the reality is if you
Yeah.
just don't shut everything down, everyone's gonna get sick and everything's gonna get shut down anyway.
Right. Exactly.
Um, and that has started to happen in
Absolutely.
on a small scale in some intimate communities. Let's say a town where everyone is sick, or the
Right.
hospitals can run things, and
Right.
they just have to. And now we're in this place where I think it seems like the vast majority of Americans, and I'd say a lot of people in the world overall, are definitely aware of the severity of a global pandemic.
Mm,
um, but there is unfortunately still some people who either they don't really understand what the real danger is to them personally, or um, how to actually fully implement the measures that public health officials are recommending,
mm,
and finding the ways to make it like communicable to them, and make it personal to them, I think is like a big key.
right.
Will be integral in stopping or slowing the spread of this virus.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think shifting it away from like, oh, like you're young and you're being inconvenienced to like, like let's think of the collective, let's think of the humanity. I mean, that's also part of the point of this show is to like, right, hear people's stories. Let's use the internet for good. Let's connect people. Let's foster empathy.
Absolutely.
Let's foster togetherness. This is the time to come together and not just be like, oh, let me see if I can distract myself for 8 hours a day for the next month, like with different YouTube
Yeah,
videos. And there's nothing wrong with, fun distractions and stuff like
for
that, but
sure.
it's a great time to, look for volunteering opportunities or to, talk to your grandparents, right? I mean, I spoke to Ben Bass, who we both know, and he said that he's never been more in touch with his family. And I
Yeah,
thought that was great. That's a great thing to do for someone who's, far away. I mean, you're home, so
for sure.
they're down the
I
hall,
mean,
but
yeah, I mean, I think like this is going to be a very challenging period for many people all over the world. And I mean, honestly, from like, to be more of like a realist, I don't think this is going to be a short ordeal. And I think,
totally.
and like, especially in the next few weeks, we're going to start hearing a lot more scary news headlines.
Right.
Um, as like we start seeing the massive influx of people who either are infected and don't know about it, or doesn't, even if they do know about it, as unfortunately some people turn to the worst. But
Mm.
I think it's really important to keep in mind, as you were saying before, like that there are a lot of moments of humanity that we can find within the darkness.
Totally.
And we are, a really resilient species,
Yeah.
and a lot of our greatest achievements have come out of moments of, extreme desperation and, the need to survive. um and I'll this is something that I've definitely kept in mind from this one of this a company that I'm a big supporter of, that they said it's physical social distancing doesn't need to be, well, physical, we don't need to actually be socially distancing, we need to be physically distancing.
Right.
And that thankfully now we have internet and
Right.
Zoom and other types of streaming services that
Right.
we could really use to stay in amazing touch in ways that we never would have been able to even as 10 years ago.
Totally.
um and yeah, I just hope that we, as once the panic to some extent subsides, which I think it hopefully will in in a few months,
Sure.
we can use this kind of uncomfortable period of time to really focus on things that are important to us.
Definitely, definitely, because that's really what it's all about, and I think that's good. I definitely saw some of that online too about reframing the social distancing as really it's physical distancing, but you can still
Hmm.
keep close social contact, right? You can still call your friends, you can still do Zoom,
Absolutely.
you can do a litany of other things to keep in touch. I mean, people kept in touch back in the day by writing each other letters, right? And they had
Ah, what a radical idea.
they had strong connections. So it's certainly possible, and it's very accessible these days. So you mentioned, that you're a clinical researcher, at New York Presbyterian in Manhattan. That's
Yes,
correct.
yes, yes.
So, prior to being shut down, of course, but what was the response from hospital staff as things started to ramp up in New York City?
Yeah, so that was a really, it was kind of like an escalating, slow burn. So I have my PI, my principal investigator, who he was actually due to be going to a conference in China, I think next month.
Wow.
And I remember, as at the time it was just an epidemic. The epidemic was, ravaging much of China. I remember, having to, say to my coworker, half jokingly, but seriously, I'm like, oh, our boss is gonna have to cancel, his conference, or he should. Um, Luckily, the organizers ended up doing it for him, and I
Sure.
think by the time that happened, everyone realized that
Right.
this would be canceled, as would
Mm.
everything else. Um, but as it, I think, became closer and closer, I think, at least from on my end,
Mm.
um, just like admin and research staff in general just picked up on it.
Mm.
We all do work in healthcare and are just somewhat like you know, you know, health conscious and like in a worldly sense. If any sort of health disaster was happening, it just, chances are someone would mention it in the office.
Right.
Specifically, there was one of my coworkers was kind of like my real back and forth, um, just kind of like feeding thing about this. And um, I definitely had this, voice in my head that says, I should probably start like seeing if I could work remotely.
Mm.
Um, just, I mean, not even in the context of like, all right, well, eventually everyone will have to, or at least everyone who can will have to and should. Um, but really, just like practically, I was thinking about my own well-being.
Right.
And you know just even the idea of like kind of like bringing that up in like American work culture, it was kind of, you know I wouldn't say it was actively frowned upon. It was like I didn't really know if it was appropriate, especially,
Mm.
I'm fairly young, I'm new to this whole
Right.
enterprise.
Right, you're supposed to
Um,
get 40 years before you work from
yeah,
home.
right. Like this is the time. I'm in my 20s. I'm supposed
Uh,
to be working for more than I'm worth.
yeah,
Um, and I eventually, did seek, talk to my supervisor, and he was
right,
understanding, thankfully. Basically, all my coworkers urging me, like, Eitan, like, you should be doing this.
right, yeah,
And this was like early March.
mm,
So at this point, everything in New York was still open.
right,
So I started working remotely and avoided group settings. And um, at that point, there already started to be some communication, I think, in the hospital.
mm,
Um, but it wasn't until March 16th is when my department officially said that everyone should be working remotely. Like every admin staff is, do not come in.
mm,
But at that point, there already was like a good amount of communication. I still get daily emails, and we have fairly frequent, Zoom meetings
mm,
about the hospital's response. I don't know to what extent is like helpful to communicate, but what I could say is like, you know, everything that you read in the media about shortages of ventilators and space and personal protective equipment, it's true. And our hospital, so it's New York-Presbyterian, and within New York-Presbyterian, there's the Columbia Medical Center, and there's also Weill Cornell Medical Center. I know our hospital was where the second patient in New York who had the infamous transmission without being in a foreign country.
mm,
That's where he was, and I think still is housed. And
mm,
um, all I can say is I think as our numbers are definitely going up, and
yeah,
we're expanding our capabilities to be able to deal with this pandemic. And it's going to be a hell of a battle. I can say that the physicians I've spoken to, they aren't panicked. And I think part of that is like kind of like that, resilience that when you're so intimately close, you have to, maintain. I'm sure their parents are very anxious. My aunt, well, my cousin is a nurse, and she has some COVID patients on her floor, and her mother, who is a physician, is worry sick about her. But there is, especially when you're in the belly of the beast, you have to, you know, kind of separate, the scary nature of what things can be,
mm,
and to the actual like reality of what the situation is that you're dealing with, which is you have people who are relying on you,
yeah,
both in the hospital and outside the hospital. And, I have seen some tremendous, like, you know, acts of recognition throughout the world for a lot of healthcare professionals.
yeah,
And even though I am one, like thankfully I'm not in that crisis zone right now.
right,
So I can say like I felt very gracious towards my you know I guess what coworkers and superiors who are still in the hospital doing clinical work,
mm,
um, and facing like the brunt of the storm.
mm,
And I think and hope that if you know any healthcare professionals in your life, that you could thank them, and also um, just be mindful of like a lot of the things that they've been saying for years about the importance of taking health seriously, and
right,
being proactive instead of reactive, because unfortunately this is a situation that we could have been so much more prepared for. And
certainly, certainly,
now we are here, and the question is how do we respond in a healthy and productive way. And I
totally,
think we'll do it. But you know it's really thanks to those healthcare professionals, public health officials, um, and eventually, so in heeding the advice of those professionals, and all of us buying in, that we'll be able to get through this crisis.
definitely. Yeah, we need good health officials now more than ever, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I saw online there were some things, people in Italy thanking the doctors when they were finishing their shifts by like clapping from their
Yeah.
balconies, like an entire building complex was clapping. That was nice to see. I saw some people organizing like a Zoom call for doctors in Israel,
Hmm.
something like that. Have you been able to continue any of your research from home, or is that not really so
Yeah,
feasible?
it's interesting. So a lot of the work that we do is clinical based. So we're collecting data from patients, in the hospital and in operating rooms, or just or even before and after surgeries. So that stuff has basically, at least in terms of collecting data, has been put on hold for and it has been on hold for like a couple weeks.
Sure.
Um, Basically all research activity involving like collecting new data has been completely halted out of the hospital.
Hmm.
Um, Everyone and every resource that's available that can be directed towards, fighting this, pandemic is being, towards that pandemic.
Right.
For in terms of my end,
Yeah.
we actually have some data that was already collected from before that I've been just, working on and writing a paper based on, and, still collaborating with one of the physicians who, again, he seems unconcerned in the sense that I think he's, confident and collected.
Good.
Um, but it is important to kind of like have that level of, I guess like on some it's and I don't know. I'm actually second guessing myself because it's really it's kind of like one of the key dilemmas here is just
Right.
like that it's shifting back and forth between panic and, let's say, like anxiety, um, and and on the one hand, like that is what, like, it comes from like an intuitive bodily response that responds to danger and fear.
Right. Yeah.
But then there's that other, end, which is, all right, like everything's fine. We're
Right.
cool. We're chilling. We'll be okay. And,
Right.
I think right now, especially, people keep on pushing back and forth between those two.
That's true.
Um, and it's because like we're really not used to this reality. So you
Right.
throw someone into an uncomfortable situation, and they don't really know how, like, how to be balanced, how to have like the right level of whatever it is they need in a given situation. Um,
Totally.
and I think like with time we'll get more used to it.
Yeah.
And I could even say for myself, I think I'll be more productive once, this is just the new normal, and
Mm.
I've already kind of like felt it becoming the new normal.
Right.
um but yeah, thankfully have been able to get some work done, but
Yeah.
I don't think this is anyone's most productive time, and I think there is some level of understanding to that
Yeah,
right now.
yeah. I think people are okay. At least bosses are okay if their workers aren't quite as productive as they used to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Output is down a little bit.
We got some other things going
We
on,
got other
but
things going on. Yeah, with that doctor, speaking to that, I think, yeah, confidence right now can almost be like it's reassuring, but it's also a little off-putting because you think they
yeah.
might just be a little too sure. I think
Hmm.
kind of the nice balance is optimism because we're
Yeah,
hopeful that it's going to get better, but optimism also leaves reality.
yeah,
It doesn't impinge on what's actually happening. It's just sort of like, listen, we're going to try to take the most hopeful outlook here,
for sure.
and we're
I
going to
think
try
that's
to do
very
our best.
important.
Yeah.
Like, the worst case scenario that everyone fears and is seen in Contagion is technically possible.
Mm.
Um, but I'd say it's fairly unlikely just based on the fact that we have, so many people who are trying to do the right thing.
Right.
And like, it will be more likely if more people, believe in doing the right thing and trying
Mhm.
to be optimistic.
Right.
If people believe that the world is ending and just kind of like accept that reality, um, I think it'll be more likely for that to be true.
Right. Yeah.
And again, not to like feel, you shouldn't feel bad if you have, let's say, this kind of like doom and gloom feeling. It's normal. I was
Yeah.
watching a video from a psychologist the other day, and she was suggesting to, you know, as one of the many things that you could do to kind of like deal with like coronavirus anxiety is to basically like schedule in like 15 minutes of worry time where it's
Mm.
like, all right, like I'm gonna like write everything down that I'm like bugging out about today. And
Mm.
like that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
because it's a stressful time. Like it
Totally.
would be unreasonable to say that you aren't stressed or like
Right.
aren't like thinking about this in a, thinking about your loved ones, thinking about, your own well-being, your career, anything. Just even just being sad about like admittedly, let's say, small things like missing a show or
Sure.
not being able to go out with your friends. Like
Yeah.
these are like extremely important in
Right.
maintaining overall well-being.
Absolutely.
And it's okay to be upset about them,
Completely.
but
Completely.
overall I still think you similarly need to, you know prioritize and focus on things that you are able to do, and then
Yeah,
you're able to feel gratitude for.
definitely. Right.
Because we already have been hearing, I think, a lot about like the mental health crises in America,
Mm.
and this can be a really trying time, and if we don't prioritize our own well-being and our own mental health in this really trying time, um, it's only going to just be worse for us. So
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, what you're saying, all these concerns that people have, that might seem trivial are real, missing a show, not being able to hang with friends. That's all very real. And outlets like writing and, writing about what you're stressed about is great. And I think it's great also in
making
normal times too.
videos.
Yeah, making videos, exactly. It's a great way to cope. And it's also, I mean, I think it's a great thing to do regardless of the pandemic. My hope is that some of
Yes,
these strategies that people are utilizing and harnessing and practicing can also be practiced once this is done, right?
absolutely.
Let's have some
And
lasting good from all this bad.
100%. I mean, I think, again, this is going to be a really trying time for a lot of people, and um I wish that it never ever happened, but seeing as it has happened and it is continuing to happen, we really do have to think, all right, how can we take something of value from this? So
Hmm.
seeing, let's say, what artists are going to be, who their specialty is to be creative, seeing
Right.
how creative they can be in
Yeah.
a space that they're limited.
Right.
What kind of art is going to come from this.
Right.
Scientists and professionals, working class Americans, and all over the world, like, you know, every like when you're in a situation of desperation, regardless of where you are, you have the potential to have, again, the most amazing humanity, that come, kind of like to counter that. Um, and yeah, I think, like, if we were to go from this to kind of like back to the old normal, it
Mm.
would, not to say that I'd say it's almost a waste. Like, we are having this, horrible, 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 like, ordeal that, again, we are dealing with. But we can absolutely learn from it. We could become better as a species because of it. And seeing those stories that can that have, like, inspired me already, I think they definitely provide some fuel for me going forward.
Absolutely, as they should. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, maybe for some they'll be able to go back to the old normal, but I think even for those who are kind of passe about it and aren't thinking about this too much and are just trying to keep themselves distracted, it's
Yeah,
it's too great of a crisis and a world phenomenon and story to go back to the old order. I
yeah.
mean, there's just too much that's been shifted.
Yeah, even if they don't themselves, let's say, like,
Exactly right. If they're
have,
even
let's
if
say,
they're
the
not
active
internalizing
change,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
someone else will, and they'll kind of go along with that as
Right.
well.
Majority of people, yeah, they'll, the followers will follow.
Yeah,
And
it
I think more
happens. It
people are
happens.
leading. Right.
Thankfully, yeah, and
Yeah,
this
thankfully.
this is an important time for, and however you can, to be a leader,
Definitely.
to again listen to the people who are leading you, again, let's say, on a public health end,
Yeah.
and then be a community leader. You asked earlier about the struggle of trying to communicate this to people. One
Yeah.
of the earliest people that I was communicating, like, I think about the pandemic, it was actually my parents.
Mm,
And they're both pretty pro science, but they're
good.
also my lovely parents who wanted me to
Sure.
see me do well,
Yeah.
in all aspects of life. And they heard me in, like, February, start like late February, early March, starting to, like, bug out about this virus that, like, the vast majority of people didn't really seem like a massive threat at the time.
Right.
And I think, thankfully, they did start heeding my advice, and
Mm.
they took some precautions a little bit earlier. They did a little bit of shopping a little bit before some other people, um, but it's, I don't even really know why I was going here with this, but it is what it is. But
Yeah. So I have a
no, it's
question for you on meditation, actually, because I
yes,
know
oh, perfect.
I know you're a big fan of meditation, and you wrote your thesis about it in college. So I'm
Oh,
wondering,
yes.
how has this outbreak affected your own meditation, and then how can the practice of meditation help others in this time?
So yeah, it's something I've been thinking a lot about because unfortunately, and I still have been meditating, thankfully, but one of the things I've missed even before, again, everyone was fully on board with this is like when I wasn't going into the hospital, I started missing out on my daily meditation group with the monk, and his name's Saigon. He's great. He's a wonderful, wonderful monk. And, personally, I've always found that group meditations, especially when you have like kind of like a teacher or a community to kind of like bring you in,
Yeah.
can really beneficial.
Yeah.
Um, and just like we're talking about being a follower, we're all to some extent followers,
Yeah.
and if you
Totally.
surround yourself in a group or a community of like-minded folks, they can help bring you there.
Definitely.
So I'll say for myself, even as someone who was going every day when I was at the hospital and did my thesis on it and want to, it's going to be a major research focus of mine in my future career, I hope. It's hard to maintain a daily meditation practice. That being said, this is a perfect time to start.
Yeah.
The biggest, thing I've heard from people whenever I've talked to them about it in the past, like, oh, that sounds nice, but I don't have time, or,
Right. Right.
I have other things I need to do, but
Sure.
now you don't.
You got
So
plenty of time now.
plenty of time and nothing else to do.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about a lot of the media hype around mindfulness, and
Sure.
to some extent, I think it could be grating and a little bit you almost patronizing, because
Yeah.
some people will be like, you have a real issue going on. Oh, just meditate, mindfulness, it's fine. But
Um.
and but I will say, there is a tremendous amount of research that has been going on for years, and also continuing to go on, and even beyond that, various faith traditions,
Yeah.
famously Buddhism, but I can definitely say
Right.
Judaism and Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, they all have contemplative traditions.
Yes.
And I think if you ask any, whether it's a monk or a mystic or a secular practitioner of meditation, about the practical benefits that it has for them, they will be able to go on and on about
Right.
how beneficial it is.
Yeah.
Um, and as we were saying before, that this is a really stressful time where a lot of negative thoughts can be, coming in.
Mm.
So it really is like a perfect time to like kind of train that muscle that is your brain. I mean, it's not a muscle, but we can develop our brain, and we could, rewire neural circuitry, to try
Sure.
and stop negative thought patterns from repeating.
Yeah.
And meditation is basically the antidote to that.
Right.
There are tons now of apps, and that have been existing for the past few years, and whether it's Headspace, Insight Timer, Calm, there's some of the big ones. um, and now I've noticed a lot on Instagram is that you have a lot of like independent creators who are producing their own meditations or yoga practices.
Yeah.
And I would highly recommend anybody who's in quarantine, or, social distancing or physical distancing is what we're going to try and maybe use, to try at the very least, listen to like a recording or two from one of these apps, seeing how it feels. And even if you don't really like, feel that visceral experience that, your meditation friends, or you've seen that, from the monks like advocating like right away,
Right.
at the very least, like give it a shot, because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, you're not gonna be swole after one day of working out,
Right.
so you're not really gonna be completely zen for the rest of your life,
Right.
meditating once for 10 minutes.
Right.
Um, but it is a tremendously powerful tool, and
Right.
there's I think no better time. eh, You know, there's no better time than the present,
Yeah.
and that's all that ultimately really is where we are living, like in the present. Like we could think about things that we could have done in the past, and things about that we could have done that we could do in the future,
Mm.
and I think there is a time and place for that. But when it comes to actually, it's like dealing with the crisis, dealing with your obtrusive thoughts, dealing with your anxiety in that moment, you need to try and think about where you are right now, which is especially if you're listening to this and thinking about these types of things, you're probably healthy, but maybe you're anxious about what could be or what has happened. And trying to reframe your thoughts into a more present-minded focus, I think is going to be really beneficial for everybody long term.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, working on the breathing and your stress response. I mean, these are just like core tenets of your overall health. And, if
Absolutely.
you can start to, break those in a little bit, it'll
Yeah.
have long-term benefits and it'll have immediate benefits. Even like one practice of meditation, you might just get a little bit of a
Oh,
little
yeah,
bit
just
of
a
a
little
feeling.
bit of boost. I mean,
Yeah.
Ruben could probably attest, and you can probably attest, not Ruben, speaking to the audience now,
Yeah.
that
Sure.
I've been annoying about this to most people for the past couple years, regardless. Thankfully now it's harder to talk to people, so I can't even be even more annoying about the need for meditation.
Yeah.
But you know, meditation, things like yoga, just exercise overall,
Totally.
they're all extremely important right now. And
Yes.
I think one of the biggest things overall, if I could say, if to kind of keeping overall well-being and health, is to kind of stick to yourself to some level of a routine.
Yeah.
You don't want to like fall into like negative behavior patterns just because there's a pandemic going on. Again, easier said than done.
Sure.
So you know, Ruben asked me what time I woke up this morning. I'm not going to answer that question, but and
10
it's
seconds ago.
right. It's okay to give yourself a break, and it's okay to not be 100% on all the time.
Right.
But
Right. But don't fall in the
overall,
pattern of eating all the cookies and that you stocked up for the
exactly, like
pandemic
you
and all
still
the
need
dairy.
cookies a week from now, and like
Yes.
who
Yes.
knows what the cookie situation will be a week from
Cookie shortages.
now. Forget about toilet paper, but
Yeah, no, but good habits and a good routine, that's a great way to,
absolutely.
help get your mind in the right place on
Yeah, and you wanna just keep, yes, we're spending more time inside, but it doesn't mean that we can't be living healthy, to some extent, normal lifestyles.
right.
And those are, I think, key parts to it.
Yeah, you can do a lot from your living room that, you can do that you might have gone to, you might have gone to the gym. You can still do, some gym workouts in your living room. You might have gone to the
Absolutely.
office, you can still do some work from home. You can still do a lot of things from home. That's the kind of the thing that's a little disconcerting about this virus is it's disrupted everything, but as a
Yeah.
whole, people are still pretty safe. Like they're in their home.
Hmm.
It's not like soldiers are knocking at their door. Like
For sure.
we still have a great deal of safety, and the water's running, the electricity's on. Like there are a
Yeah.
lot of comforts. It's important not to take it for granted. And the nice thing about meditation also is that it's a break from the screens, and you can do it yourself, and you can
Absolutely.
do it without an internet connection, even because there's a lot of Americans and people globally
Absolutely.
who don't have that. So I think
Yeah.
it's great to
Read a
try to look
book.
for those kind of practices.
Like this is, you know, whether it's meditation or otherwise, like I think there are tons of books about meditation. But one of the things I could say for myself is like I don't really have as much time to read anymore, or haven't had, don't have. Well, I could say professionally and both within school, I didn't have as
Yeah,
much time to read for pleasure as I
right,
did when I was a kid.
right.
And I have a stack of books right there. Some of them meditation related, some of them not.
Hmm.
That I hope to to chip away at right now.
Yeah,
It's a great time to unplug.
yeah,
And another thing that I have been thinking about, and it's definitely not been my idea entirely, but there have been some articles and some small-ish movements over the past years that have you know brought up like the Jewish idea of a Shabbat or a Sabbath as a way to take a break from technology. We are in this increasingly connected world, and I know for myself, there are definitely been times, even just like during the week, where I say, "All right, I know what's going on. I'm just not going to read the news for X amount of time because it's just going to stress me out more."
hmm
And you know, in the Jewish Sabbath, like traditionally, people would unplug, turn off, not turn on or turn off lights, spend time with family, interact with others, spend some time outside, have a meal, um, and I think this as meditation, especially in the West, kind of came from uh, you know it came from this one guy, John Kabat-Zinn. I have his book right here, um, full
Nice,
full catastrophe living.
nice.
And he was he's a biologist from MIT who became a Buddhist and saw the value of meditation, but understood that the religious connotations that were involved with traditional Buddhist meditation were not for everybody. So he took, let's say, the secular, like, objective values of meditation and kind of disseminated it to the world.
Mm.
I think we've seen that with yoga as
Yeah,
well. And I
certainly.
think, like, the idea of a Sabbath, which is, definitely, prominent in, Judaism and,
Right.
some forms of Christianity. It can definitely be a value that, whether you're a religious or non-religious Jewish
Totally.
person, or Jewish or otherwise, that we could, really appreciate right now, which is that
Definitely.
there's just so much going on,
Yeah.
and our lives are now so much more dependent on technology than we ever have, I guess, I think, overall ever felt in the
Right.
past. But even,
Right.
like, in this specific moment,
Yeah.
all of our work is now based off of, streaming and video calling. And, some time to take away from the screens, or even if you're still on your screen, to say, what, I'm going to take some time for myself to stay away from social media, or
Yeah.
stay away from the news. And to kind of just, like, give yourself a break, and knowing consciously that you're doing that because it's good for you long term, I think is, like, a really important value that I've started to, like, implement, just, like, on a daily basis for myself.
Yeah. No, I mean, those ideals of the Sabbath and taking a break from electronics can and certainly should be secularized, and it's a great time to
Yeah,
do it, even if it's even if it's not even for a full day, like even if it's for half a day,
exactly.
something like that. Just start with some break, especially now that we're even more connected than we were
Yeah.
3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Well, Eitan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I'm glad you are healthy and relatively happy, it seems,
Oh, yeah.
living at home, back with the parents.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm glad you're taking care of yourself, and thank you for the
Absolutely.
insights from
And
the
I miss
medical
being
side
your
of things.
neighbor, but frankly, I'm enjoying the cushy, cozy lifestyle of having a backyard right now. So,
Nothing wrong with that. And
but
hopefully I'll
I
see
will
you in a couple
rejoin you
months.
eventually.
Yes, yes, eventually, soon.
Soon.
Fingers crossed. All
Yes.
right, buddy. Thank you so much.
All
Episode
right.
5 in the books.
Namaste.
Namaste. Peace, brother.